You are not a racist. You would have marched in Selma. You would have stood at the bridge. This is the comfortable lie good people tell themselves. And Martin Luther King Jr. spent his final year dismantling it, scene by scene, sin by sin. Before he died, King identified four specific sins committed not by villains, but by good people. Ordinary, decent, well-meaning people. People who never burned a cross, never raised a fist, and still, he said, became the greatest obstacle to freedom. Or sins, ranked from forgivable to unforgivable. The final one is the sin King feared most, the one hiding inside almost everyone watching right now. By the end, you will know exactly which sins are yours. Guilty or not, you will know. Somewhere tonight, a person scrolls past suffering. A headline, a photograph, a plea. They feel a flicker of discomfort. Then they scroll again. They are not cruel. They simply feel powerless. That flicker, King warned, is where every sin on this list begins. Powerlessness is not innocence. King stood before congregations and told them that numbness is a choice, dressed up as fate. The world did not become broken by accident. It stayed broken because good people decided, quietly, that breaking it further was not their job. In 1963, King sat in a narrow cell in Birmingham, Alabama, 11 feet by 6 feet. A single cot, a slit of window. He had no legal pad, so he wrote in the margins of a smuggled newspaper, in the dark, alone. The letter he wrote that week would outlive every sermon he ever preached. It was not addressed to segregationists. It was addressed to 8 white clergymen who called themselves moderates, allies, friends of the cause. King aimed his sharpest words directly at them. He wrote that he had almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the black man's great stumbling block was not the outright bigot, but people who preferred a negative peace to a positive justice, who were more devoted to order than to freedom itself. That sentence is the spine of everything that follows. 4 sins drawn from that cell, from a mind pushed to its limit by good people who meant well and did nothing. Rank 4 begins with the easiest sin to recognize in others. Sin number 4, the preference for order over justice. It sounds reasonable. Keep the peace, avoid the chaos, let things settle naturally. King watched this sin operate in real time, on a spring afternoon, on the streets of downtown Birmingham in 1963. Police Commissioner Bull Connor ordered fire hoses turned on teenage marchers. Water blasted children off their feet and against brick walls. German shepherds lunged at unarmed students in their Sunday clothes. Photographers captured it all, and America finally had to look. But here is the sin. Many white Birmingham residents did not condemn the hoses. They condemned the marchers for disturbing a peace that had never included them. Order to the comfortable always looks like justice, because they have never needed anything more. King called this negative peace, the absence of tension mistaken for the presence of justice. A silence over a grave is not peace. A boot holding a neck still is not order. It is violence wearing calm's costume, and good people applauded. Weeks earlier, King had launched what became known as the Children's Crusade, recruiting students as young as 6 to march, knowing full well the cameras would capture whatever happened next. He needed the nation watching. He needed order's true cost made visible at last. This sin is forgivable because it comes from comfort, not cruelty. The person who values order has simply never been forced to ask who that order protects. Rank 4, recognizable, common, and still, King insisted, corrosive enough to delay a nation's conscience for decades. Sin number 3 sits closer to the bone. The convenient timetable. Not opposition to justice, but opposition to its timing. Wait, they said. Not now. Give it time. Let the courts decide. Let the next generation handle it. Patience, dressed up as wisdom. This was the exact argument the 8 clergymen made to King from their pulpits. They agreed injustice existed. They simply believed the timing of protest was wrong, the tone too forceful, the demonstrations too disruptive to a city already, in their words, working on it. King's answer became the most quoted passage of the letter. He wrote of a father explaining to his 6-year-old daughter why she could not go to the amusement park advertised on television, watching her eyes cloud with a bitterness she could not name. Time, King insisted, is not an ally waiting to deliver justice alone. It is raw material, becoming whatever the people holding it decide to build. Left alone, it does not bend towards fairness. It settles into whatever shape comfort prefers. Two sins revealed, two remain, and they cut deeper than order or timing. They live inside people who consider themselves allies, who post the right words, who feel the right feelings, and who King, near the end of his life, grew almost desperate to warn. Here is the uncomfortable truth. This video is building toward. You may have already recognized sin 4 in a neighbor, sin 3 in a politician. The next two sins are harder to spot because they live closer to home. Ask yourself honestly, before the next sin is even named, when was the last time discomfort about injustice cost you something real? Not a feeling, not a post, something real. If the answer troubles you, King would say trouble is the beginning of honesty. That honesty is rare, and it separates people who watch history from people who bend it. King believed the 4 sins could only be broken by people willing to stay uncomfortable on purpose, as a daily practice, not a passing mood. Staying with that discomfort instead of scrolling past it is itself the awakening King spent his life demanding. If this list has already started working on you, that discomfort is doing exactly what it should. Subscribe now and let it keep working. Not as a favor to this channel, but as a small refusal to look away again. King said the movement survived because ordinary people kept choosing to stay engaged after the cameras left. Staying present for what comes next is that same small choice. Because what comes next was hidden from almost every history lesson you were taught. Inside that same cell, before writing a single word of the letter that would define him, King was not composing scripture. He was drowning in a doubt nobody told you about. For the first several days of his imprisonment, King was held in solitary confinement. No visitors, no newspaper, no light but a single bulb. His biographers later revealed he wept in that darkness, convinced the Birmingham campaign was already collapsing outside the walls. He believed, in those hours, that he had gambled his movement and lost. Local ministers had publicly criticized his timing as reckless. Donations had dried up. Bail money was gone. The man history remembers as certain was, in that cell, nearly broken by doubt. Ralph Abernathy later recalled how quiet King became during those days, how the usual cadence in his voice flattened into something closer to grief. Even his closest allies did not fully know how close their leader stood to walking away from the entire campaign. His wife Coretta had recently given birth and grown frightened by threats against their home. King did not know, sitting alone, whether his family was safe. This fear, rarely discussed, sat beside him in that cell more heavily than any sermon he later delivered. It was his lawyer, Clarence Jones, who finally smuggled him a section of newspaper, folded small, hidden beneath a shirt. In its margins, in pencil, in a hand shaking from exhaustion, King began the letter that would become his most enduring sermon. This is the turn nobody tells you about. The letter was not written from strength. It was written from a man staring at his own possible failure and choosing in that exact moment to name the sins of the people who claimed to support him. That distinction matters more than it seems. King's clarity did not come from confidence. It came from crisis. He identified sin 3, the convenient timetable, while doubting his own timetable. He indicted comfort while sitting in the most uncomfortable hours of his adult life. Which brings the list to sin number 2, the sin King feared most among people who called themselves supporters. Not the moderate who preferred order, not the patient ally who preferred timing. This sin belongs to someone closer, someone who agrees and changes nothing. King named it the shallow understanding from people of goodwill, not ignorance, but full comprehension of injustice paired with a refusal to let that comprehension demand anything real. Agreement without action. Sympathy without sacrifice. The most seductive sin, because it feels like virtue. He wrote that shallow understanding was more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding. The outright bigot could be argued with, because he denied the facts. The shallow supporter could not, because he accepted every fact and still asked for nothing to change in his own daily life. Picture the specific moment. Clergymen who published statements calling King's methods unwise and untimely were not segregationists. Many had privately told friends they supported integration in principle. In principle, King wrote back, is exactly where justice goes to die a quiet, respectable death. Principle without cost is not conviction, it is decoration. King watched allies nod along to his sermons on Sunday and return to silence on Monday, understanding that agreement had never once desegregated a lunch counter or freed a single prisoner from a cell. He had seen this pattern before in northern liberals who praised his eloquence from a comfortable distance while opposing measures that might have touched their own neighborhoods, their own schools, their own quietly guarded advantages. Praise was cheap. Change was not. This is the sin hiding in plain sight for most viewers of this video. The shared post that changes nothing. The private agreement that costs nothing. The goodwill that never once asks, what am I personally willing to lose for this to actually change? Sin too sits close to home, and it should feel uncomfortable, because King intended it to. But one sin stands above it, named on that same page, the one he considered the true root from which the other three had grown. Before that final revelation, understand what made King's list so dangerous to the comfortable classes of his era. He was not attacking racists who expected his criticism. He was attacking people who considered themselves good, and that betrayal of expectation made the letter unforgettable. The 8 clergymen who received it never fully recovered their standing. History remembers their names now almost exclusively through King's rebuke. Good intentions, once exposed as insufficient, do not protect a legacy. They simply become the exact evidence used against it, forever. Sit with that before the final sin arrives, because it is the sharpest warning in this entire video. Every sin ranked so far, order, timetable, shallow understanding, was committed by someone. The final sin is committed by everyone who does nothing at all. Sin number 1, the appalling silence of the good people. Not opposition, not delay, not hollow agreement. Pure, total silence. The absence of any voice at all from the people King believed had the most power to end injustice and used none of it. He wrote it as one devastating sentence, and it is echoed for over 60 years. History will have to record, he warned, that the greatest tragedy of this period was not the vitriolic words of the bad people, but the appalling silence of the good. Read that again. Not the loudest cruelty, the quietest comfort. King ranked silence above hatred itself, because hatred at least announces its position, while silence hides behind the illusion of neutrality, letting cruelty operate entirely unopposed, unnamed, and therefore unstopped. Picture the specific silence he meant, not Bull Connor's silence, who never claimed to be good. The silence of the church member 3 pews back, who watched the bombing coverage, felt genuine sorrow, said nothing to their neighbors, and returned the following Sunday unchanged. Silence is efficient. It requires no argument, no confrontation, no risk. It lets a person believe they have taken no side, when in truth, silence has always, quietly, taken the side of whoever currently holds the power. King understood this with terrifying clarity. This is why sin 1 outranks every sin before it. Order can be challenged. Timetables can be shortened. Shallow understanding can deepen into real conviction. But silence offers nothing to argue with. It simply waits, patient and comfortable, for the moment to pass unchallenged. And moments always pass. That is the terrible efficiency of silence. Bombings become anniversaries. Marches become documentaries. Urgent crises soften into historical footnotes. And the good people who said nothing get to remain good people in their own minds forever, without cost. King spent the final years of his life trying to break exactly this pattern, refusing to let silence calcify into forgetting. He returned to Birmingham again and again in speeches, refusing to let the nation's comfort settle back over what had actually happened there. Now return to the question this video opened with. You are not a racist. You would have marched in Selma, perhaps. But King never asked whether you would have marched. He asked whether you speak now, today, while the marching is still needed somewhere. 4 sins, again quickly, in order. Sin 4, preferring order to justice, mistaking calm for peace. Sin 3, the convenient timetable, spending someone else's patience to purchase your own comfort. Neither requires cruelty. Both require only distance. Sin 2, shallow understanding, agreeing completely and changing nothing. Seductive, because it feels like virtue, while demanding no sacrifice. And sin 1, above all others, the appalling silence of good people. The sin with no voice, and therefore no accuser. 4 sins, born in a dark cell, in a man's most uncertain hours, aimed not at his enemies, but at his supporters. King did not write to convert racists. He wrote because good people are always more numerous and their silence always costs more. So ask the question the thumbnail asked. Guilty. Which sin is yours? Not your neighbors, not the politicians, not history's. Yours. King did not write that letter for a textbook, but in pencil, in the dark, for whoever was comfortable enough to read it. If any part of this list found you, King would not want you to feel shame and stop there. Shame is just another form of silence. He wanted the discomfort to move somewhere, into a word spoken, a silence finally broken, a choice finally made. Think of the church member from 3 pews back decades later, finally speaking up when it mattered. That is not a grand rewriting of history. It is one ordinary person refusing sin. One, just once, when it would have been easier to stay quiet. This channel exists to keep dragging that discomfort into the light. One figure, one letter, one uncomfortable cell at a time. Because history's clearest warnings are always the ones good people were most tempted to ignore, and someone has to keep repeating them. So do not let this be another scroll, another flicker of feeling that fades by tomorrow. Subscribe, not for this channel's sake, but for yours, as a small, deliberate refusal to be silent again. King's letter survived because someone finally chose not to look away. Choose that now. Break the silence in whatever way is honestly available to you today. A conversation, a stance, a small cost willingly paid. King never asked for grand heroism. He asked good people to simply stop being comfortable while injustice waited on their timetable. He wrote from that Birmingham cell that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, tied in an inescapable network of mutuality. Silence was never neutral. It was always a choice, and it is still a choice now.